and Walter and their colleagues started to become more frustrated with our continued skepticism. And Louis started making statements about how, he didn't have a lot of time to waste on this, and he had other important things to do, so why weren't we just agreeing that what they'd found was convincing and just go along with it? It started to become more and more personal and politically driven rather than driven by the ideal of science and investigation and, oh, that's interesting, that contradicts, what might we learn from that?
Can I ask you what you mean by political?
Political in the sense that these are powerful people, and that going up against them can have repercussions. And if it becomes personal in addition to that, while you try to keep that under the surface, it starts to develop an atmosphere of conflict. And so the work becomes not one that's easy and collegial and collaborative, but rather competitive and aggressive. And Bill dealt with it in the ways that he dealt with it, and I dealt with it by trying to figure out a way to ask a different kind of question than, was it the asteroid or was it something else? Because from my perspective, I didn't really have the data to say whether it was or it wasn't. And so the main thrust of my dissertation really became, well, how finely can we tell time? How precisely can we tell time in these rocks that span the Cretaceous-Tertiary boundary? And the way I did that was, they had published their scenario, and based on their modeling, they thought that most of the effects of the impact and the killing mechanisms, whether it be, short-term cooling from the dust, knocking out the sunlight, to other kinds of acid rain and so forth, that would have taken place within a century or so. And so I thought, well, one way I could ask the question within the context of the Cretaceous-Tertiary debate and the asteroid debate differently is, well, let's look at some of these rock sequences that people think have the most continuous record. And if this is supposed to have happened within a century, do we really have a chance of precisely recognizing and having preserved in those sequences every century so that we know that, okay, it happened, and it's likely that, we have a rock record that's giving us snapshots of every century. And the likelihood after running the models was very low that you would have that kind of temporal resolution.
It was a great response. I mean, it's an epistemological response to the asteroid hypothesis. You're asking the question, what can we know based on the evidence that we have as paleontologists? And I think you wrote at some point that in one of the areas, I think it's the San Juan Basin, that has the best record, only one of every 200 centuries is represented.
Well, I'm glad to see that someone's read that paper.